Mike, do you know what a bungle is?
I do not.
So a bungle, it means to carry out a task clumsily or incompetently. A question I have to you, obviously, right off the bat, is do you think they bungled this draft class, Mike? What are your kind of your general thoughts here?
They did not bungle this draft class. Those two first picks, solid. I think super solid, to be honest. Joe Burrow, obviously, I don't think you could do anything but Joe Burrow. I think you had to, at pick one, pick Joe Burrow. It made too much sense after the season he had. And obviously, the question, Joe Burrow is a little bit of a one-year wonder. But, man, that 1 year was a wonder. We haven't seen it. I don't think I've seen anything quite like that. The level of dominance they had in a division like the SEC, uh, it was something to watch. And then to last year's uh, college football champions to take them apart like they did Clemson in that championship game, I can't say I've seen anything quite like it. So I think the pick just made too much sense. You had to make that pick there. And I think T. Higgins obviously is a player, really solid player on the other side of that championship game. Um, Real playmaker, big bodied, kind of can do it all. Like he's not necessarily a prototypical big bodied wide receiver. He kind of is a little bit more finesse route runner, which is kind of surprising coming from a player like his size and kind of what you think he might be. But I think two solid picks.
No, I agree. I think obviously there's questions if Burrow is the just in terms of raw talent, if he's the best player in the draft. But I don't think that there's really any questions anymore, at least, that he was the pick for the Bengals, no matter what. Like as much as some people want to think that Tua is maybe a better prospect, or at least has a better track record. He has the injuries that kind of derail him. So I don't think that you could have went anywhere other than Burrow. And kind of to supplement that with Higgins, it's interesting. You know, when you put on T's film, it's like every film I put on, it seems like he erases a concern. You know, it's like I watch him at first, and it's like, are his hands that good? And then it's like, okay, you put on another one, yeah, he has good hands. It's like, are his routes that crisp? And it's like, yeah, no, they are. And you just keep going down the list, and he kind of checks all the boxes. I don't know what weaknesses he really has. Sometimes his get off's a little bit questionable. He can struggle to escape some solid press, but other than that, man, he just does everything at like a B to B plus level. And to get him in the second round, early second round, obviously, it's just a really solid pick. The only question I have is I don't know how much you necessarily needed him, considering you do have the A.J. Greens, Tyler Boyds, and John Rosses. But he really is the heir to A.J. Green, and I think that kind of given who was on the board, I do think that he was probably the best option there. You know, and then a couple other guys I just want to touch on in terms of value were in the fourth and fifth round. Akeem Davis-Gaither out of Appalachian State. I'll be honest, he kind of slid under the radar at first, but the more I've watched him lately, I didn't officially grade him, but I kind of think that he should have went in like that late second round, to be completely honest. This man, you talk about somebody who can be a will linebacker in today's NFL. A couple of videos you were talking about how like Mac Wilson could cover in college. Akeem shows a lot of those same tendencies, especially when it comes to tight ends and covering running backs out of the backfield. And at the same time, though, he's not bad against the run either. He has a really high motor. Obviously, he didn't play the best competition, but it's like I don't know why he was available in the fourth round when it didn't seem like a very strong linebacker class, and I do think that he was one of the strongest ones in the class. You know, he's great at finishing plays. He's great at, as I said, coverage. I just don't know what the weakness is, and I think that kind of putting him as either that Will or Sam linebacker, to be completely honest, in this defense, I think that he'll be a starter, and to get that in the fourth round, that's really solid. And then lastly, in the fifth round, like I said, Khalid Kareem, he wasn't my favorite guy on film, but a couple months ago, people were saying that he was a second, third round player. So no matter what I think of him, to get him in the fifth round at pick 147, just to even get a guy of that potential caliber, you know, I think that's a really solid pick. Obviously, you might not need defensive end, which we'll touch on later, but there's nothing that hurts with getting a versatile kind of schematic rotational piece, and especially one that has high potential in that fifth round. You just can't complain there. So overall, do I think it was the best draft? No. But for a team that kind of has a history of bungling their draft class, I think that this was a pretty solid job.
Yeah, this wasn't a 1 year rebuild for the Bengals either, and obviously they haven't been a super competitive team of recent, but this team is still a couple pieces away, and I think they know that. I think this was a class that like it makes they might have taken some good. They took good value. They might not make a whole lot of sense for this next upcoming season, but maybe for seasons past that, it's definitely a long-term track record they're looking at, not just this next upcoming year.
No, I agree. But at the same time, we are doing a 2020 offseason recap. So we got to address the 2020 team they're going to be putting on the field, Mike. So what are kind of your thoughts on this projected offense that we're going to see here in 2020?
Yeah, I think easy to point out, they four wide receivers, all really quality talent. It obviously if your number 3 and 4 option are John Ross and T Higgins, I think you're doing something right. But the amount of capital you had to pay to get there might be a problem, and I think that's obviously John Ross hasn't lived up to being that pick. As I've talked about the Sonic syndrome, speed just kind of blinds teams, and the Bengals fell into that a little bit, but Joe Burrow has the weapons. He has Joe Mixon. He has 4 wide receivers. Obviously, they could probably use a little bit of an upgrade at the tight end spot, but that offensive line definitely has some holes as well, and that's something that kind of is concerning here. Obviously, Jonah Williams and even Michael Jordan, I think, have showed some potential that left side, but it doesn't flow through after that. So I do like that the pressure should be coming from his front end, so at least he can see before he gets destroyed by maybe the Ravens or the Steelers or even the Browns. That's kind of concerning. I really don't like to see that, especially with the front 4s and 7s he's going to be seeing in this division. But again, this team is not there yet, and I think they know that they're going to get there.
No, I completely agree. You said it best. When you have a team that's undergoing kind of that long-term rebuild, really what you're just looking for are positives, honestly. And I think that Joe Burrow he's in a situation where with those weapons, he could be really a great pick at that number 1 selection, obviously, and he kind of has to be for this team to turn around. But the guys who are really going to make him worth it are those weapons. You talk about that wide receiver room. I say it every time. You want a versatile room that can do a variety of things, and you have the kind of encapsulation of that with guys like John Ross who can take the top off the defense, Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins who can kind of do it all, and A.J. Green, even though he might be a little bit limited now with his injury history and just now his age, he's still a really good wide receiver. And even though I think there are some questions of like, oh, who's the wide receiver 1, you have really 4 capable guys that could be wide receivers 1 or 2 on some other teams in the league, honestly. So I do think that there's definitely some holes on the offensive line. I'm not as bullish on like the Suafilos and Hart as you necessarily were. They are experienced starters. Obviously, Suafilo coming from, I believe, it's Houston, and Bobby Hart started for them last year. They're not going to play at a crazy high level, but they're kind of just that stopgap until you can get somebody there. And I don't mind that. I don't think that they're going to get Joe Burrow killed, but I don't think they're going to do him any favors either. So I do agree that those are definitely the biggest holes on this team. Outside of really tight end. Tight end was one that you touched on. I know we talked about it actually in our first video. I think that one really interesting tight end that they could maybe go after now and could be on this team for years to come would be a guy like O.J. Howard. You look at Tampa Bay, and I really just don't see what they're even going to use Howard for next year, given the fact that Gronk's out of retirement and they have Cameron Brate signed up for the next couple of years. So it's like, what exactly is his worth to that team when you could probably at this point trade like a 5th or 6th round pick and get a tight end that, I mean, you and I both felt out of the draft would be a mainstay in this league for the next 10 years. I think that would be a perfect addition to this offense because really when we talk about young quarterbacks, one thing that we look for is kind of that tight end who can just post up at the first down marker and make those plays on 3rd and sometimes 4th down that gets the team out of trouble. And I think that O.J. Howard would be a guy who does that, but at the same time is able to help out this kind of lackluster offensive line. We both liked O.J.'s blocking, and I don't think that we've got to see that much in Tampa Bay. But if you got a guy like that on a team like Cincinnati, I do think that he could maybe reach his full potential. And even if he doesn't reach his full potential, whatever his potential that he reaches would be higher than Drew Sample and C.J. Uzomah.
I totally agree with you. It's obviously young talent that could be productive. I think it maybe a missed draft pick. I apologize for going back, but Maybe take it instead of drafting 3 linebackers, then a DN. Maybe getting like a player like Cushionberry for that interior offensive line. That might have been a really solid pick to get a young interior offensive lineman in that mix, and obviously one that Joe Burrow is pretty familiar with. So that would have been a really solid pick that I think they kind of missed the boat on a little bit there.
No, I agree, and especially when you do have this many holes, which I mean we'll see on this defense. There is no shortage of holes here. They definitely have some. You do need to, when you're drafting, particularly, you need to let the board dictate where you're going. So when a guy like Lloyd Cushenberry is available into the 80s, like that's a guy who people thought could go in the early 40s, late 30s, early 40s. So when you have so many holes, and especially there is the comfort level there with Burrow, I think that would have been a really solid selection. But off of that, obviously, Mike, what are your general thoughts on this defense?
That's a really solid front four. I'm gonna start like I usually do. Uh, DJ Reader was a great pickup, a nice space eater there. Really cool combination with Geno Atkins, who is the exact opposite. That man gets to the quarterback. His first step, his speed, just an absolute animal. I think one of our I'm not going to say it because I say it too many times, but just an animal all across the board. Maybe sometimes doesn't get the credit he deserves. Carlos Dunlap has probably seen a drop off between his prime. He's definitely not in his prime anymore, but still a solid player. And then I really love that rotation of Carl Lawson, Sam Hubbard, both really solid players, and they both one of them might just move over and eventually replace Carlos Dunlap. When the time comes. But both really solid players. If that's your 3-man rotation, uh, I really like to see that. That's a really solid group right there. But then I stop at front four because that front 7, on the other hand, those back 3 linebackers, not as pretty. When Josh Bynes might be your best linebacker, I think you got some serious issues. And I think Josh Bynes has been um, probably thrown around a little bit too much. He's been definitely a traveler, to say the least, but he's been a solid player. But he would be a good third linebacker option on a quality playoff team. Not the best option on a below average, probably going to be picking in the top 10 team. That's not where Josh Bynes needs to go. But I'll let you get into it a little bit. There has been a little bit of reform on this back end with that cornerback position.
No, I mean you go out and you basically become the Cincinnati Vikings in terms of your secondary. You bring in Trey Waynes, you bring in Mackenzie Alexander. I think that for those guys, obviously, they maybe didn't live up to expectations in Minnesota, but potentially a change of scenery, but some added familiarity with each other. Maybe it'll be the charm here, considering last year we really didn't see what we wanted to out of a guy like Darqueze Dennard necessarily, and they really didn't have a good nickel last year. So I do think that maybe it's just a lateral move, but it's still an interesting move, and then really that safety kind of trio. We talk about what we look for out of safeties, and I do think that they kind of have the prototypical free and strong safety. I really like both guys. And Von Bell, I mean, he was solid coming out of college. He disappointed a little bit in New Orleans, but there's some potential there. I think that those guys, between the 3 of them, they're able to kind of be that last level of defense, but they can also fill and make plays in the run game that maybe that linebacking core wouldn't be able to do. So at the end of the day, while I do think there are definitely some holes, and you touched on them really well, that might be that linebacking core, that might be the worst core in the entire NFL, to be completely honest. But obviously you do have a good front 4 in front of them that will kind of elevate them a little bit. But really, before this team goes anywhere, I think you need to upgrade that offensive line on the interior and the right side, really everybody except Jonah Williams. And then you need to address this linebacking core,
Yeah, no doubt. I think a guy that's available in free agent right now, Nigel Bradham might be a player that they can kind of just plug in there right now. And I think he's a veteran that still has a lot of tread on the tires. He's not just a 1-year replacement for one of these players and kind of just a plug and play. I think he can make a long-term effect as a veteran, not only now, but in that long-term, probably the 2 to 3 year range where they're probably, if they do this right, in playoff contention. Yeah, and I also will say, though, that on a high note, we often see corners on that 3-year role. Obviously, me and you know one pretty well, Darius Slay. So I think a lot of times we see it takes 3 years for especially those corners that are picked late, maybe first, early second to really truly develop into that spot, that role. We've seen some recently that have kind of been that way too. It takes a little bit of development. They need to get in the league, face some NFL wide receivers, some real talent, and different, obviously, athletic ability there with the training and health staff. So I think this might be the year to blossom. That's what I thought you might say. But I think I might be a little more optimistic. I think we might see a lot from William Jackson this year.
No, I agree. I think that I hope that we do, and I do think that he has a lot of the intangibles. And really, to go off what you said, like it's kind of an epidemic at this point in terms of people looking for immediate results when this isn't something that happens overnight. You know, there's a big difference between, especially let's say a Jackson who played at Houston. There's a big difference between any receiver that he ever faced in college to going up against Odell Beckham, you know, or even going up against a Jarvis Landry or a James Washington. Like, honestly, who would William Jackson have ever faced in his life that was probably up to the caliber of James Washington? Probably nobody. So the problem is that people want to look at him within his first 16 games, first 32 games, and make a judgment on him. And if they just want to be the first one to say bust, when I do agree with you that maybe he's not a bust yet. Maybe he just needs time to develop, you know?
Yeah, but I think this is the year to show up. I think you really got to show potential. And hopefully not be Trey Waynes, where Trey Waynes is a good player, but he's kind of been a perennial number two, and I don't think he's ever showed anything more than that. And I'd be scared to see William Jackson kind of fall in that same suit, even though Waynes has paid like a number one in a big sense. But who cares about the players on the field? Well, it actually matters a lot. Really important because they are the ones playing the game. But it really matters that you win games to get in the playoffs, which this team probably is not doing. But are there maybe some games that you think the Bengals can really win and might show a little bit about their team?
No, actually, you said who cares about the players. I say honestly, this year, who cares about the games with Cincinnati? No, I'm being facetious. Obviously, of course, there's games that they can win. Most definitely, I think Week 4 is a really good one. Obviously, we talked about some of the Jaguars' deficiencies. It's kind of a question mark in terms of who is the better team. I think that we see a lot of those strengths in terms of Cincinnati's weapons. I think that we saw a lot of deficiencies in terms of Jacksonville's secondary. You know, so I think that that'll be a really competitive game. And then if they're not winning Week 4, the next one they might have a chance to win, honestly, is Week 11. You know, when we were doing the Redskins video, our first video in this series, I said that I think that Washington will probably have the number 1 pick next year, and I'm sticking to it. I do think that the Bengals will probably be favored in that game just because of the amount of talent that they do have. You know, even though they do have those holes, they do kind of have playmakers at most levels. You know, they do have the first-round quarterback. They have those weapons. They have a guy like Jonah Williams who we hope can live up to what we thought he was going to be last year before the injury. And then and like you said, that front four. So at the end of the day, I wouldn't be shocked if they won both of those games. What are some games that you're looking at?
Yeah, no, after that Redskins, I think the next two are a very interesting competition. And real quick, I'll touch on the Redskins. I think facing that front four is going to be really interesting for Joe Burrow. I think it's a nice competition. He's going to get some pressure, and I think it's a winnable game that he will get pressure, which I think is a really cool combo for that game. But the next two, I think, are both winnable games, and I think we'll say a lot about this team. I think this defense has enough to line up against Saquon Barkley. Obviously, they don't have the linebackers, but they have the front four that they might be able to detain him a little bit. And Josh Bynes has always been a really solid coverage linebacker. That's the one thing I'll give Josh Bynes. He's just average to right below average at best, but he's not going to cover Saquon Barkley, but not a bad coverage linebacker. So I think they could stop him enough to make that a really competitive game, though. I think the Giants might be a little bit better team talent-wise. Actually, they are a better team talent-wise, no doubt, but they could swing that game. And then the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins are also a better team talent-wise, but I think, if they come to play, I think it should be a good matchup. Will I be watching it? No. Will I be watching any of the games we've mentioned? No, but I think it should be a good matchup. And I think that those corners for the Dolphins versus the wide receivers for the Bengals and Joe Burrow, I think it's going to be a fun matchup.
No, I agree, especially with that last one. You think about where Miami is in their rebuild process and where Cincinnati is in theirs. They're kind of at the same point, although Miami have kind of taken the initiative in allotting a bunch of money to upgrade and fill those holes. Obviously, we saw with the Byron Jones, the Kyle Van Noys, all those signings across their defense. Cincinnati hasn't quite made those yet. Obviously, you mentioned Trey Waynes getting his money, but other than that, they haven't had really those impact signings that are going to push this team over the top. So if you had to ask me like, oh, where do you think they're going to fall in terms of like the Vegas win total at 5.5, I would probably take the under. I think I wouldn't be shocked if they won 6. Yeah, no, I would be shocked if they won 6 actually, but I wouldn't be shocked if they were right there at 4 or 5 wins. You know, so at the end of the day, Mike, where do you kind of fall on that?
I'm actually right with you. I wouldn't be surprised if they won. I would be surprised if they won 6. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 6. But I'd probably go towards the under. I think probably I'm seeing more of a 4 to 5 win season for them, to be honest, and probably picking in that top 5, top 10 again come next year.
No, and maybe, maybe since we keep on 11 to go receiver, maybe we'll see a Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase reunion in the top 5 next year. But you didn't hear it from me. You didn't hear it from me.
But you
So
know what you did hear from Prevo? In previous videos, if you watched, if you guys like these videos, like, subscribe, comment, let us know your thoughts. If you're a Bengals fan, tell us some of your thoughts. Are you a Joe Burrow optimistic? Is this team somehow going to beat the Ravens for the number 1 in the division? Let us know. We'll comment. It might not be the most pleasant comment because you cracked out of your mind, but we'll comment. And maybe if you are a fan of a team that we haven't done yet, maybe you're a fan of the Miami Dolphins, which is a sad, sad day. And being Lions fan, we feel you. But if they are a fan of the Miami Dolphins, they want us to do the Miami Dolphins. Who are we doing next, Mike?
we are doing the Miami Dolphins next, baby.
Damn right we are. We doing the Miami Dolphins as much as me and you don't want to see that. But we here spreading football knowledge. So with that, Preeves, you got anything else?
Nah, man, I think we mic'd up, and now we mic'd out.